Well, the monuments we've looked at for Hadrian, the Tivoli Villa complex, which I told you I could easily do 3 hours on, but I didn't. The Pantheon, the temple to Venus and Roma, and the mausoleum. These are all very important pieces of architecture in their own right. They're very important monuments. They give us clear evidence of Hadrian's personal interest in architecture, which we learn about from the writings of Cassius Dio. They represent an amazing contrast in many ways, because the mausoleum is obviously based to a certain extent on the mausoleum of Augustus, but the Temple of Venus and Roma is based on Greek ideas of temples, except that double enclosure back to back. What's going on there? Off we go. The Pantheon, a piece of purely Roman work, that round building with the dome on the top of it. They're also very important because they represent in many ways the climax, if you like, the highest point of achievement of concrete architecture. There's nothing built after that that actually makes any great impression. Marble is only used for columns or it's used for facing. It's all brick and concrete. But the thing about these buildings is that it reminds us of something else. During the reign of Hadrian, the Roman Empire was really at its most prosperous and its most peaceful. Trajan had started a war with Parthia. Hadrian brings it to an end. Hadrian personally inspects all the Roman frontiers to make certain they're secure. Hadrian's reign really starts off a long period of relative peace. No wars or anything like that, a very prosperous period. And the prosperity of this period is shown to us in many ways by the remains of the site at Ostia. Ostia, remember, down here is the main port, the main harbour of Rome. Established as a Roman colony in the Republican period, Claudius builds a bigger harbour over here, and then Trajan builds a bigger harbour, but this is still the main port for Rome. This is where everything's going to come into Rome. This is where everything goes out of Rome. So it's in Ostia that we're going to see a reflection of the prosperity of the Roman Empire at this particular period. Now remember, in the case of Ostia itself, not Trajan's part, but Ostia itself, I told you in the week before the exam how a large fire destroyed quite a large part of Ostia, so Trajan had to start a rebuilding process there. Hadrian starts the rebuilding process in Opus Reticulatum. Hadrian takes it over in Opus Testaceum. Well, we're very fortunate, and we've got at Ostia one of the best surviving Roman cities anywhere in the Roman Empire. Pompeii and Herculaneum were preserved because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. They were covered with volcanic ash and mud. Ostia was preserved quite simply because the place gradually fell into ruin after earthquakes in the 4th century. It was abandoned because it was too malarial. It was too exposed to pirate attack and things like that. So the ruins were just allowed to gradually crumble. And that was the situation at Ostia until the 1920s, when this little man, Benito Mussolini, well-known dictator, a person who introduces fascism to the world, but he did do some good things. He got the trains to run on time. That's a joke. That's a very 1930s joke, but people still use it about politicians. It can't really be that bad. He got the trains to run on time, you know, that sort of thing. But Mussolini was determined to recreate the old Roman Empire. He starts a war in Libya, Abyssinia, and other places like that. And as part of his idea for showing the people of Italy the glory of the Roman Empire, remember, Italy as a country did not exist until the 1890s. It was a long time before Italy actually was unified. I think it was the 1890s. He starts this whole program of excavations in Ostia and in Rome. Here you see the sort of thing that was being done at Ostia, and you can see what the remains of Ostia were like. Some walls still surviving to the first floor level. Collapsed remains all down like this. excavated in a very bad way, one has to say. I mean, you can see the type of methods were not what we would use in archaeology today, but nonetheless helping to reveal this. This is as much of Ostia was actually revealed in the 1920s thanks to Mussolini. Parts of it have since been rebuilt. Well, Ostia today, of course, is not changed very much, so you've got more trees there. You can see that's more or less the area of Mussolini's excavations. Well, the thing is, as I said, a large part of Ostia was destroyed, damaged in a fire. The rebuildings of Ostia started under Trajan. Trajan needed accommodation for the workers in the port, at the Portus Traiani, which is just underneath the wing of the aircraft there. But the rebuilding process continues under Hadrian. And you can see in this slide just how much of Ostia was actually rebuilt at that particular time. Everything shaded here represents Hadrianic rebuilding. And this is done in opus testaceum, not opus verticulatum or opus mixtum, which is what you see being used in the Trajanic rebuilding. Opus testaceum is now the principal building method for use in Ostia. Well, you can see how wonderfully preserved these buildings are, and what is really impressive about them is their design. All of these buildings, or many of these buildings, seem to have been built by private developers to provide rental accommodation for workers and their families. And what you get is a very modern concept of building. Basically, a series of flats on different levels, apartments on different levels around a central courtyard. Well, this is the insula. Now remember, an insula really means an apartment block. But it's used in this particular slide, which I stole from somewhere. In the context, you probably recognise it, a block within the town plan. But it's the insula of Serapis and the charioteers. It may actually have been a hotel. That part may have been a hotel. But you can see the basic design. You've got 3 floors, sometimes 4 floors in some cases. We'll be looking at this one in a bit more detail in a moment, all around that central courtyard. This is what the actual buildings look like, and you can see how remarkably well preserved they are. Certainly you've got the ground floor, you've got the first floor, you've got the beginnings of the second floor, and in some of these buildings you've even got the remains of the floor on top of that. There was a height restriction in Roman building in Rome. We don't know whether the restriction was applied in Austria as well. But you can see how these houses are really very elaborate. Balconies on the second floor level. I mean, that's not bad at all, is it? Much better than what you'll see in many places today. When we actually go inside, now I'm getting the hang of this technology, this is what we were looking at earlier. So you've got this enormous sort of arches, brick-built arches, which give you a covered arcade around this garden area, which support a covered passageway at the first floor level. And you can see the beginnings of groin vaults going up here. Groin vaults appear under Trajan, but they're certainly in great use under Hadrian, supporting the next level all the way up there. They're very well designed blocks. You get communal latrines in them, a communal toilet. These are the supports for the wooden seats, which have gone in this case. More elaborate latrines would have had marble seats on top of them. And you've got in front a little gutter. This is where the water would run all the time so that you can go to the toilet with your sponge on the end of a piece of stick. You don't have toilet paper. You dip it in the water and you apply it to your body. Don't look at me like that, young lady. So that's the idea of that thing there. You've got fountains inside these courtyards like this, and you've still got the remnants of wall painting, which is kind of fourth stylish. Now, I'm not really going to talk about the wall painting at Ostia. But the most exceptional buildings, and as you can see, I've got this from a book, the most exceptional collection of buildings at Ostia of Hadrianic date are this. In effect, is a kind of gated complex. It's a series of buildings, rented buildings, known as the garden houses. You've got a single entryway there. You've got doors into these buildings going onto the main streets, but it's what you would call a gated complex. You know, you've got to show your pass, your security pass to get in there, otherwise you're not allowed in. But it seems to be basically rental accommodation. Well, these are what the garden houses look like. And as I said, you've got this main entry here, you've got this large expanse of greenery, you've got a series of fountains set around here. All these are residential buildings of one type or another, and you can see one of these courtyard buildings over there. The garden houses, which had at least 4 floors in them, are all basically the same plan. You've got this long strip plan, back to back like that. You go in through this entrance area here, you would find yourself in an open garden. It's never been properly studied, so we don't know if it had flower beds or anything like that. It quite likely did, because you have those fountain areas here. And remnants, one of the fountain here, and the overspill channel as well. Well, you can see they're basically back-to-back units. You've got a central passageway, you've got stairways that go up to the next level. There's indications that the upper floors had piped water supply. So really very sophisticated architecture indeed in this set of building, the garden houses. Excavated in the 1920s, as I said earlier, and unfortunately, rather like with a lot of Pompeii, not a great deal of attention was paid to the problems of conserving building. Remember that the principal cost involved in archaeology is not so much the actual excavation, but the preservation of the remains afterwards. But you can still see these are, broadly speaking, a very late version of the 4th style. So you've got these very large panels there with figures on them. You can just see the traces of the figures in each case. But beautifully decorated houses when all is said and done. The garden houses put up by private developers down here. But we've got all sorts of other building complexes. We've got some really quite early Republican buildings also surviving here in Ostia. And you can see you've got a theatre, a Capitolium temple, a forum. This is the original centre of Ostia here. That's the original colony. That's the road going out to Rome. But a really astounding feature of Ostia are all the horia, the various warehouses, storehouses. Trajan's port is the main import port, but there's a lot of material still comes to Ostia, and we find a lot of these warehouses, again, built by private businessmen. Well, this is the one that featured, of course, in the textbook, the Horia Hebakatheniana et Epaphroditana. So I always have a problem doing that one. Beep, beep, beep. Turn you off in a moment. Their names are Greek, so they're probably freedmen, not slaves. But freedmen could be very wealthy, they could earn a lot of money, and they've obviously paid for the construction of what must have been a building of at least 3 stories. It's all brick opus testaceum construction, as you can see here. You've got shop accommodation on either side of the main entrance. Originally it must have looked something like this. There is evidence within the building for these. They're not balcony supports in this case, they're for helping pull up things from the ground floor level. I love the little cat trying to work out what's in the amphory down there. Beautiful entrance doorway. Carefully moulded brick. Now remember that brick starts being used in Rome with Tiberius, and we see at the Castra Praetoria the use of moulded brick specially made to be seen, not to be covered with stucco. We also see this in Trajan's markets. And we've got the same type of thing here. This brick has been carefully made to replicate stone architecture with a little bit of stucco ornament added as well. Large inscription there. Brick columns with their brick capitals. These were not covered in stucco, they were meant to be seen as they are now. Well, this is what the Horia actually looks like when you get inside it. Coming in through here, The plan is very much like what you see in some of the houses in Ostia. You've got this central courtyard, but in this case surrounded by storerooms, which, as I said, at least 2 floors, probably 3 floors altogether, stairways giving access to the upper floors. The evidence that survives indicates that each one of these had its own lock. So whatever is stored here must have been something very precious. Shops at the front, storehouse at the back. Within the courtyard there's a most surprising feature, and that is this. It's a black and white mosaic, which unfortunately is in such bad condition now that the excavation photograph reveals it a lot better. But the excavation photograph also makes the point just how well most of these buildings were preserved. And what we have here, possibly an indication of some trade that the 2 owners are connected with. We've got a female lion on one side, and we've got obviously a tiger on the other side. This suggests that they might have had some connection with importing wild animals for the games, but they can't have been kept here if that was what their business was. And this lovely little thing right at the back, an office setup, complete with a statue in it, a grill over the window to stop somebody from breaking in. And again, look at this very beautiful, carefully made ornamental brickwork. This is brickwork reaching its best. Well, we're going to go away from architecture now and start looking at some of the art of the period. And the most significant thing to note about this is, of course, Hadrian himself. Lots of woolly curly hair like that, a big curly beard. He's the first emperor to wear a beard. He sets a fashion for Roman men to wear beards, but we do know beards feature on Trajan's column. So the beard wearing had started earlier, but had spread upwards in many ways. Remember also this accusation that Hadrian wore a beard to make him look more like a Greek philosopher, in which case a goat with a beard is a very good philosopher, as the argument went. But as Hadrian's reign went on, he let his hair get even longer and longer. Well, he's actually wearing a crown here. But the point was, this began to allow the sculptors to really start making very elaborate works of art. You can do a lot of deep carving and deep drilling. This is sort of done with a drill to make those deep perforations. It creates this enormous shadow effect, and which the sculptors of the time really must have had a wonderful time playing with. We know it is chiaroscura. Chiaroscura, we see this shadow and light, light and shadow. We see it appearing, of course, with Odysseus in Hellenistic Baroque. We see it appearing with the Flavian ladies. Again, you've got this very careful use of the drill there. But with Hadrian, we can really go over the top. This is a head of Hadrian that was found at Sagalassos about 3 or 4 years ago and featured in a major exhibition about Hadrian in the British Museum. This head is around about sort of 50 centimetres high, but this enormous sort of deep carving to give this shadow and light effect. But there's one very important thing to note about statues of the Hadrianic period. Can you just see that? Before the time of the Emperor Hadrian, details of the eyes were always painted into a statue. With the Emperor Hadrian, you get the little spot to indicate the pupil, the black bit, and you've got a raised area to indicate the surround. Let's just go back to this one. You can just about see it there. It's not terribly clear, but can you just see there? The eyes are looking up, and you've got that raised area. You don't find it on every statue of Hadrianic date. It doesn't feature, for example, on the statue from Sagalassos, which is Antonine in date. But, again, this is something that's not in the textbook. I'll make a note. if you ever see a statue, Roman statue, and it's got that type of detail for the eye, it's Hadrianic or later. And we'll be seeing later in this course how the angle of the eyes also gives you an indication of the date of a statue. But this is a statue of a younger Hadrian, and again, just making this point that he's got this lovely beard, he's got this lovely curly hair, Spanish type curly hair. It gives the sculptors a whale of a time in making representations. The Hadrian's wife, Sabina, is somebody that Hadrian loves very much indeed, and she featured an awful lot on coinage of the time. She's the daughter of Trajan's sister Marcia, so niece of the Emperor Trajan, and we find her image frequently cropping up on coinage. Now notice the difference in the hairstyle. Flavian hairstyles all sticking up like that, probably a wig. She goes for a more sort of somber type of hairstyle with a hairband round it like that. We can see, again, sort of very realistic portraiture. It's good Verres portraiture. No indication of age. Can you see it there? Circle around it. I saw you squinting. You need glasses, same as me, like that. And the pupils there. So this eye feature coming up. Central parting at the front, raising a bun at the back like that. She's very recognisable. We find statues of her all over the place. But the interesting thing is, of course, that Hadrian was totally and utterly devoted to his wife and was very sad when she died, as we will see, because he built a monument somewhere in the north of Rome. Unfortunately, it is probably an arch of some kind. We've got 3 carved panels, 2 of which certainly come from the same arch, the third quite probably from the same arch, and these are connected to, the arch has to be connected to the reign of Hadrian in some way, and the death of Sabina. Sabina died, I can't quite remember which year now, I think it was 132 or thereabouts. And for the Roman emperor, the traditional method of burial is still cremation. So the body is burnt on top of a funeral pyre. You've got it represented here. And an emperor, his wife, or members of his family would go through what we know as an apotheosis. They become a god. They become deified. What we have here is a representation of the apotheosis ceremony. At the actual burial ceremony, the body would be put on top of a pile of wood. Somebody would set a match to this. It would start flaring up. And then somehow, we don't know how, there's a good description of this in, I think by Cassius Dio. Somebody would pull a piece of string somewhere and an eagle would fly up into the sky. Now the eagle, captured eagle, the eagle is the symbol of the god Jupiter. So this symbolized the spirit of the dead person going to Jupiter. And this is what we've got represented here. Except instead of having an eagle, we've got this representation of a female figure with a Hadrianic female hairstyle. There's Sabina being carried up above. Here's Hadrian down the bottom, sort of pointing upwards like that way, with one of Hadrian's not quite relatives next to him. But what I want you to notice about this, not so much the fact that Hadrian loves his wife so much, he builds a monument which is decorated with this panel and other panels, is look at the style of carving of this figure. This figure represents the spirit of the Campus Martius, the place where the funeral ceremony took place. And look at the hairstyle. Is that a Roman hairstyle? Hadrian Graeculus. The hairstyle on the figure representing the god of the Campus Martius is Greek. Classical Greek influence on this Roman piece of art. Everything else about it is Roman, except for this. See how flat it is. Wide open spaces. This is typical of classical Greek sculpture. not Roman sculpture. But this is Roman because it's representing a real event as well. But you see this thing about Hadrian Graeculus. He has that Greek type figure there. Well, these are the other panels which are thought to be from the Arca di Portogallo, or found in that particular area. This one is certainly from the same monument. You've got a head of Hadrian very well preserved there. Now, behind Hadrian is an older man and a younger man. Remember what these represent? Think Titus, the procession of Titus. Think the Chancellaria reliefs. The older figure represents the Roman Senate. The younger figure represents the Roman people. One of Trajan's advisors by the same here. It's called an ad locutio panel. It's a panel in which Hadrian is addressing the people of Rome. Well, this has probably been recarved to a certain extent because that figure doesn't quite fit in, half naked like that. You wouldn't expect to get a half-naked figure in a piece of Roman art. But you've got this boy here in a little toga, ad locutio. Hadrian is making a speech. He's probably giving money to people. It must represent some event in Hadrian's reign that we don't know about. Finally, we have this one. It's the same size as the other two panels, but the head on this was recarved in the Renaissance period, or rather replaced in the Renaissance period. So we cannot be 100% certain this represents Hadrian. It almost certainly does though, because Hadrian spent a lot of his time as emperor travelling. It's an Adventus scene. We've got Hadrian coming back to Rome, coming through one of the gateways, the goddess Roma there, old figure, Roman Senate, young figure, the Roman people, and of course everybody here has got the Hadrianic type beard, and there have to be Roman soldiers standing in the background somewhere which have now disappeared. Here's a lictor with his bunch of rods there as well. So, but the insignificant thing about all of these panels, let's just flash back through them, is they're Roman, they show real events, but the idea behind the decorative scheme is Greek. Wide, empty spaces. The Spirited Campus Martius down there shown with a Greek hairstyle. Open spaces. Roman relief sculpture is characterized by being crowded with lots of figures. Open spaces. Not quite so open there. So you see this, this aspect of Hadrian, this return to a classical style, rather like Augustus, really like this particular idea of art. Notice incidentally here how Roma is giving Hadrian a sphere, a globe. It represents the world. You know, the Romans knew that the world was not flat. They definitely knew it was round. They didn't have any problem with that. But this represents Roma, the spirit of Rome, giving emperor the Roman world to govern. Well, Hadrian, as I said, clearly deeply loved his wife Sabina. But as I said in the first hour, he was a known homosexual, and he shocked, he scandalized Romans by having pretty much a public affair with this young boy called Antinous. Antinous, who comes from Claudiopolis in Bithynia, modern Bolu, after meeting Hadrian sometime about 125 or so, he travelled around the Roman Empire with Hadrian, constant companion to the Emperor Hadrian. He died in very mysterious circumstances in 130 on the River Nile in Egypt. The records of the event don't really explain what happened, but we get the idea that Antinous decided to sacrifice himself to the River Nile for the spirit of Hadrian, for the safety of Hadrian. We really can't work out exactly what goes on. But what is clear is that Hadrian was so much in love with Antinous, he even creates a new city called Antinouropolis in Egypt at the site where Antinous died. Antinous is also deified. goes through this process of an apotheosis. It's as if he's a member of the imperial family, but he isn't, of course. He was evidently a person of exceptional beauty. We find statues of Antinous all over the Roman Empire. Now, if you want to look at Roman sculpture, you'll find that the greatest number of sculptures, representations, are of Augustus. After Augustus, it's Trajan, then it's Hadrian and Antinous together like that. I mean, there are more representations of Antinous than some of the Roman emperors. He's represented all over the place, Tivoli, Rome, everywhere, as the perfect ideal of Hellenic male beauty. So you've got this wonderful Greek-type hairstyle. It's a classical Greek sculpture, isn't it? You know this is a classical Greek sculpture. I don't have to tell you this. You're all doing a course on Greek sculpture. You see him coming back in various forms, personified as one god or another. I can't remember what these two were now, but shown here with the snake. I think this might be as Mercury. You can recognize this as Antinous. I mean, there's no problem with recognizing the face. That remains constant all the way through. You see him in this very idealized portrait, which I showed right at the beginning. You can't really work out, is this Antinous or is this Apollo? See, Apollo was a person of dubious sexuality. It wasn't quite clear whether he was male or female. Well, this is what you see in Antinous. Is this a man or is this a woman? And it's this idealized Hellenic beauty. This is one from Egypt. You find statues of him, busts of him all over the place. You can't get away from him. Very recognizable hairstyle. You see him represented as a god. The god Sylvanus, the god of the wild. Here he is holding a floral wreath, different flowers of different seasons. Here he is dressed up as if he's going to cut down the vines with that typical vintner's folks there. You've got an altar in the corner here. Greek type carvings again, notice very open background, classical Greek type carving. You get him represented as Dionysus, or Bacchus, the god of wine, the god of the grape. You get him represented as a pharaoh. This one was found at Tivoli, the one on the left-hand side. I think this one was found at Tivoli as well. Aristeas, he's another one of these woodland-type gods. So wherever you go, you cannot get away from Antinous. There was two monuments at Rome that were dedicated to him. One was an Egyptian-style obelisk, carved with hieroglyphics, recording his life. That is still visible in Rome. But there was another monument which has now disappeared. We don't know what it was, but we have a series of 8 relief panels from there, known as the Hadrianic tondi. And these originally showed Hadrian and Antinous. Well, these are the Hadrianic tondi on one side of the Arch of Constantine. I've showed you the Arch of Constantine before, because the Arch of Constantine has got inside it the great Trajanic battle frieze, the great Trajanic battle frieze there and there. It's got the Dacian figures here. We're going to be going back and we'll be looking actually at these panels in another class, but it's the Hadrianic tondi I want you to concentrate on now. We have these 8 panels. Now, a tondos is a circular relief panel, so tondi, plural. They represent different scenes connected with the hump. And we find 3 different types of animal represented in these. We find a lion, which represents Egypt and Africa. We find a boar, which represents Europe. And we find a bear, which represents Anatolia and the East. Trajan was known to be a great huntsman. His relative Trajan once had to write to him to say, stop going hunting, concentrating on your studies. So stop going hunting, concentrate on your studies. we know that Hadrian visited all these different parts of the Roman Empire. So these tondis seem to may represent actual hunting experiences, but they're probably more symbolic in many ways of Hadrian's interest in the hunt. What we find in these panels is basically figures in a plain background. Again, this is classical Greek-inspired art, but in a Roman context, because we're certainly looking at Romans. Now, in all of these, the head of the main figure, Hadrian, was recarved to represent the Emperor Constantine. This is what happens with the great Trajanic frieze. Trajan's head is recarved to make it look like Constantine. But when we have enough surviving of these panels, who do we find? Who's that young man over there with the Greek-type hairstyle? That's right, put your glasses on next time. Squinting like that. Antinous. Well, this represents a scene getting ready to go for the hunt. You see, they're all getting ready to get on their horses, the huntsman with his spear. Here we have a representation of a sacrifice being made to Sylvanus, the god of the woods. Here you can see this was Hadrian, but it has been recarved. The beard has been removed to make it look like Constantine. Here we can't really see very much of the head. That is a young person's head there. This is a sacrifice to Diana, the goddess of the hunt. This is actually the bear hunt scene. Again, what have we got in the background? We've got this young man. Does it represent Antinous? Well, we cannot be 100% certain because so much damage has happened to these panels. But the fact that we have got this young man represented on so many of them does seem to indicate that it might be a monument to Antinous. Well, Hadrian's travels, of course, took him all around the Roman Empire. His visits to the various provinces were commemorated with coins like this. His visit to Egypt, typical Egyptian symbols, the system, the musical instrument associated with the worship of Isis, the flamingo. Here we have a visit to Africa, scorpion depicted on Africa there. His visits were mainly concerned with checking the security of the Roman Empire, making certain that the army was ready, making certain that the economy was properly controlled. And one of his visits, quite early on in 121, took him to Britain, where he built Hadrian's Wall. Now, in case you didn't know, I wrote my PhD thesis on Hadrian's Wall. You can read it if you want to. No? Okay then. Hadrian's Wall runs from one side of Britain to the other. It's about 150 kilometres long or so, thereabouts. And it basically was to divide the Romanised part of Britain from the non-Roman part. The Scots, the Picts, you know, sort of Braveheart and all that type of thing. All those people wandering around with blue paint on them. We still talk in England today about sort of, you know, rebuild Hadrian's Wall to keep the Scots out. The actual border, by the way, between England and Scotland goes like that, so it's not quite on the border between the two countries now. Well, that's what it looks like. Originally something like 5 metres or so high, a walkway along the top. Every 1 Roman mile, which is just over a kilometre and a bit, there would be a small little fort like this, a gateway allowing access from one side to the other. We call them mile castles. A place for the soldiers to sleep. Hadrian's Wall is there. You can see the railway line has destroyed it in that particular case. And then roughly every 20, 25 kilometres or so, a Roman fort with 500 men. 25 kilometres is the distance a Roman soldier could march in one day. So they're regularly sited. Typical Roman forts, accommodation for the soldiers in the front part and also in the back, the commanding officer's house or the headquarters building, the commanding officer's home. You've got nice little hospitals, storehouses, and we tend to think of the Romans as being civilized. Well, this is the north of England, Hadrian's Wall up here. This is a fort with everything you could possibly need, including a latrine. So where all the soldiers would go at the lowest part of the fort so that all the yuck could run down the hill, so you don't sort of poison anybody. And I thought you might like to see this reconstruction of a latrine in use. Now remember, no toilet paper, you use a sponge, and you've got a gap normally underneath the seat. Your sponge on a stick like that. Wash your hands after you go to the toilet. Lots of other forts to the north of Hadrian's Wall, because the area to the north of Hadrian's Wall was occupied by Rome before Hadrian, and also by the next emperor, Antoninus Pius. And this is a site called High Rochester, which Bill Kent University used to be involved in the excavation of that particular site. But I put it up because this marvellous piece of sculpture, it shows the impact of Rome. You know, this is provincial Roman sculpture. Some guy decides, the commanding officer of the fort probably decides one day, I want something to remind me of home. I want you to make me a copy of the most famous statue of Venus that I know of, the Venus of Rhodes. Well, the Venus of Rhodes comes in two different forms. Just one of these, Praxiteles or somebody like that did the original. We sometimes have her looking like this, and we sometimes have her looking like that, the Crouching Venus of Rhodes. Obviously, the commanding officer of this fort wanted his own copy. He didn't have Parian marble, Pentelic marble, lunar marble. All he's got is the locally available stone, and a guy who's probably never done a carving in his life, but he does his best. It's the same thing, Crouching Venus, sort of pulling her hair down like that. And you've got all the characteristic features of Venus, you know, having her baths. You've got the nymphs on either side. This one's bringing the water jug so she can wash her hair afterwards. She's holding the towel. But really, I put this up to just make this point, the impact of Rome spread right to the most northerly provinces. This is my absolute favourite from Roman Britain. This is, again, it's a Crouching Venus in a bath, except this Venus is, oh, what's going on? She's dropped her mirror. She's holding an apple, very delicately, rather like some people stir their tea, little finger raised up like that, see? You've got that nymph. You know, you can imagine this guy sort of, right, I want to have a mosaic pavement and I want to have Venus in it. Okay, I'll make you a mosaic pavement. This is Venus. And I want a nymph by the side. What does a nymph look like? So you end up making this thing. And oh, I want 4 seasons around it. 4 seasons? Yeah, I want 2 female and I want 2 male. Cool. So he comes up making this particular thing. Actually, this mosaic pavement is fascinating in one particular case. Rudston Venus, north of England. You see that symbol there? Nobody knows what it represents, but it only occurs in Roman art in one other province, Africa. So there's a hint of an African connection with this. Well, Hadrian's travels result in places, he goes to places like Ankara, he goes to Byzantium, he goes to Ephesus, there's a nice little temple of Hadrian at Ephesus. Again, it's symbolizing the prosperity of the time. You know, this is a privately built temple in honor of the Emperor Hadrian, with this wonderful sort of carving of Tyche on the top. The Library of Celsus is mentioned in the textbook, although the Library of Celsus was actually begun while Trajan was still alive. It was finished during the time of Hadrian. But a remarkable piece of Syrian-influenced architecture, which a beautiful thing altogether. Finally, I just want to say a couple of things about sarcophagi, because what we find happening in the Hadrianic period, more and more people are being inhumed. Cremation was the normal method of burial in the Roman period. In the Republican period, going into the imperial period, cremation continued to be the method of burial for emperors. But inhumation, the burial of a complete body, starts in the Republican period amongst poorer people. And then it gradually spreads to richer people. We don't know why. It indicates possibly a change in the belief system. And I say possibly because remember when I was talking about Etruscan tombs, you sometimes find one burial male is cremated and the female is inhumed. You would normally associate a difference in burial practice with different religious beliefs. So, for example, there are no crematoria anywhere in Turkey because cremation is not according to Islamic custom, right? But you find them all over England, not an Islamic country. So we don't know why there is this change. The reason why we don't understand, it may be there is a philosophical development at this time, Neoplatonism, which emphasizes more the possibility of life after death. And that may be connected. You know, it's rather like in Islam, as I understand it, cremation is not accepted because how can you go to heaven as a pile of bones? You know, you can't. You know, so, but if you're going to go to heaven, you've got to be complete. So we do find this change in burial practices, and it also produces sarcophagi. Poorer people, of course, are buried in wooden boxes. Rich people are buried in these. So we start getting a new form of relief sculpture coming up. Under Hadrian, a little bit before, but definitely under Hadrian, the appearance of these elaborately carved sarcophagi, typical regional types. This is an Italian sarcophagus, very familiar in Italy, flat top to it with corners carved to represent the gods, a decorative scene on the front and on the sides because the actual thing is pushed against the wall. Commonly we have mythological scenes, and this is an example here. I'm going to rush through this because I know time's getting short. Here again is a typical Italic sarcophagi. Two examples, different sarcophagi, but the same basic scene. You know, it's this pattern book idea. People have got an idea that they want this particular type. Show me a book. Yeah, I want that one. It's the same basic scene, but they are two completely different sarcophagi made from different artists. In Greece, you get Attic sarcophagi, obviously. You do find them in Italy where they've got a pitched roof like that. And of course, typical of the Attic sarcophagi is the background is pretty open. See, Roman sarcophagus, background is full. Attic sarcophagus, classical Greek, so not that packed. You also get Asiatic sarcophagi. This is one made in Aphrodisias. Characteristic of the Asiatic sarcophagi are these wreaths that you have going around the sides there as well. Asiatic sarcophagi, though, are really Antonine in date, so I'm not going to talk any more about that. And I think, yes, this is an Asiatic sarcophagi. This is the one in Antakya. They're really Antonine in date, so I'll stop at that point. How did I do for time? Guys and girls? Ooh.